So I'm welcoming everyone on behalf of the Jewish Federation of Eastern Connecticut and Hadassah of Eastern Connecticut. This is our encore program with author and Jewish genealogist Lisa Brahin. So, as I mentioned before, any questions or comments, put them in the chat. And then after our presentation, you'll be able to have them answered. Hopefully, we'll have time for questions. This is the topic today. What is a genealogical mystery and how do we solve it? And why should we chase history? Now, I know that many of us have our family roots in Europe, and we have an interest in learning more about our roots. In our first program, Lisa shared her book, Tears Over Russia, her search for her family's roots during the pogroms in Ukraine between 1917 and 1921. And of course, that captured my imagination, introduced me to Lisa because her family escaped from the same shtetl in Ukraine, Stavisht, as my mother and grandmother did in 1923, and they were on the same ship to America. So today, we're going to explore with Lisa her further work in unraveling genealogical mysteries and giving us some of the tools to work on our own family stories. Okay. So, Lisa, let me introduce you and give you the spotlight. How are you today?
Great. Always nice to see you, Sheila.
Okay. And behind you is a big version of your wonderful book, Tears Over Russia, a search for family and the legacy of Ukraine's pogroms. And I learned so much about the book, and others did too, if they still have a chance to read it. It's a great read. So, Lisa, what is a genealogical mystery?
Well, Sheila, it's a family secret, and it's a fact that's often hidden within families. So some are really huge secrets, and some are just secrets that we don't even think they're secrets anymore, but the older generation kept secret from us. So that's what, it could be as huge as a Holocaust mystery. It could also be as huge as an identity thing, like DNA. People are doing DNA and they're finding it's basically solving a lot of mysteries, 100 years worth.
Nathaniel, our Zoom master, why don't you start putting up the PowerPoint so we can use that as a tool for Lisa to go through her Can
Okay.
everybody see that? The
Nope.
first
Yes.
slide? Okay, there you go. What is a genealogical mystery? How to solve it, learning how to dig into your family's roots, and why you should chase history. Lisa, why should we chase history?
Well, to me, Sheila, it's about recording our legacy. It's recording our ancestors' past, and it's also for future generations. So I always hope that maybe my children and grandchildren will have an interest in the future, but it doesn't necessarily. You don't have to record history only if you have children and grandchildren. My inspiration actually came from a non-direct ancestor, my great grandmother on it, not one associated with the book. On the other side, she had a younger brother who wrote a Yisker book, a Holocaust memorial book, and that was one of my early inspirations. And he wasn't a direct ancestor. So why I say this is that even if you don't have children, you can record history for someone else in your family as well.
Let's go on with the rest of the PowerPoint, Nathaniel.
Okay, so what are family mysteries? They're basically things not talked about in families. Almost all the secrets were kept by the older generations, and now we're more relaxed these days, and we're more open. But they include things like first marriages, divorces, suicides, criminals in the family. I had one gentleman remembered his father was in Sing Sing, and we had to do a little research. So that was interesting. Unexpected deaths, also accidents not talked about. I had a few of those in my family. Out of wedlock children and affairs, unknown babies. Sometimes you find after DNA testing there were unknown babies within your family. Orphans, also adoption, which isn't on the list there. your true biological identities and ethnicities, again with the DNA, health conditions, why our ancestors left the old country, who they left behind. I solved one of those, and also family fallouts and fights. So those are basically what I consider to be the biggest family mysteries. But we can go on to the next slide. This is a wonderful story. It's about a hidden child during the Holocaust from Poland who did not know his identity because he was hidden as a toddler. He knew what he thought was his name, but he grew up and he was adopted later on after the war and never knew who his biological family was. So this is from the Wall Street Journal in 2021. It made world news. It's just a fascinating story. I was one of a few people that helped to solve this mystery. And it was a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who really dug in and called me from Israel. And he said, how did you do it? So after this appeared, the next day, my inbox was absolutely flooded. There were a lot of people asking how to solve mysteries. This is a picture of his daughter, also named Lisa. She posted on a Facebook group, Tracing Your Tribe. There's also some other good groups as well, like Jewish Genealogy Portal. They have thousands of members, and she asked for help. She really wanted to help her dad get some answers. And this is the message that I answered. So we can go on to the next one. Okay, so this is a Yad Vashem testimony. So as I said before, her dad remembered a name. He wasn't sure that it was his true name, but it was an unusual name. And you can search Yad Vashem. These are testimonies on people who died in the Shoah. And I found this family was very, very large with the same name, and almost everyone had perished. But I noticed that two people survived from the family. This gentleman, his name is Bolik in Polish and Bernard in English. His aunt and a first cousin both wrote testimonies thinking he had died. They didn't know he was hidden, and they never found him, unfortunately. And these are actually almost like a death record, and Bolik is alive and well, by the way. So let's go on, and we can see this is another one, another format, and then there was a third one that I found. So I created, you can go on to the next one too. I created from all of these, there were massive amounts on this family. There were just hundreds. I created a family tree to see where he might fit in. And then he took a DNA test, and I blacked out. You can see that these are his closest matches. You look for matches 200 for Jewish genealogy, 200 centigrams, sorry, above anything above that. Centimorgans, that's the correct word. And I blacked out his matches. The first two were not there originally. They tested later, but the bottom three were there. They were young women. And one of them actually had his surname in her tree. Another one connected to someone in the tree I created to who would be his grandparents. One was from one grandparent, like a sibling of a grandparent and descended. One was from another grandparent. And then I knew I could identify from the DNA matches, because what you do is you research your DNA matches. And I was able to determine his grandparents, and I went back and I found this little boy, and one of them he's called Bolik, and he knew that was his name. So we knew that he had family out there. So I researched on the bottom of the testimonies, the person who submitted it gives their name and address. And his aunt had passed away, but we found her daughter, Esty. So you see on top there, there's an Esty. So we asked her, she was in Israel, Bolik was in New Jersey. We asked her to test. And sure enough, you can see she tested as a first cousin match. Her mother, Sarah, wrote one of the testimonies and was the sister to Bolik's father. So they're first cousins. And he, sure enough, rushed to Israel to see her. It was at the end of the pandemic, and the government helped, someone in the government helped get him over there quick when there were restrictions. This is Bolek and Esti. They're by the grave in Israel, by her mother's grave. So this is her mother, Sarah, who wrote the testimony, and this is his aunt. And they're saying Yisker. They have their prayer books there. And the daughter sent me, she sent me this photograph, and it was just very heartwarming to see. They were reunited. They just met for the first time. He finally
Lisa,
had a relative. Yes.
you have a question about this. I don't know if you want questions now or save them
Oh,
to the end.
you can certainly ask. Go ahead.
Jan Snyderman wanted to know if she has relatives buried in Jerusalem who died in 1912.
Mhm.
Where can she find burial information if she doesn't read Hebrew?
Okay. Well, if you go on one of these Facebook groups, there's a lot of Hebrew readers and a lot of people in Israel who actually have helped me out on several cases. I would suggest that there's an Israeli Jewish genealogy group. And there are other sources. I'm not familiar going way back. I don't do a lot of research in Israel itself, but there are a lot of people who do. And if she'd like, she can email me afterwards, and I could certainly help give her the names of some of the places where she can, some of the groups she can join.
Rachel, could you let some of these things in the chat come to me, because I think you're getting them only. So I'd like to see the things in the chat if you can do that. I don't know if you can. Also, so Lisa,
Mhm.
this all started when you researched someone who people thought died in the Holocaust
Right. In other
when he
words,
turned.
well, yes, and he survived. He was a child. What happened was, this is what I think. I don't know that I have the full story. A train conductor, a Polish train conductor, and it may have been a cattle car driver. I don't know. But he hid little Bolek as a toddler under his coat and brought him home with him, and he survived the war. And he's just a miracle. That's all I can say. And those Yad Vashem testimonies, I think they ought to be stamped that he's alive, because, that was a testimony to his death, because they just assumed he had died.
So
So,
I imagine that was probably what you did was amazing, and I read the Wall Street Journal article, but
right.
I imagine that's not the only story about Holocaust
No,
survivors who was searching for family and finally found them after years
yes,
of genealogical research. Yeah.
there's many. I chose this one to talk about because this family went public and the daughter gave me permission. I have actually helped several Holocaust survivor, families of Holocaust survivors, but they're more private about it. But this was a big news story, so I felt it was okay to share. We could go on to the next photo. This is interesting. If you recall, I don't know if anybody had a chance, back on the Yad Vashem testimonies, we found his father, his birth father was Avraham, and the mother was Rachel. And after he discovered this truth, you see, this is Bolek holding his great grandson, who was named Avraham. So his birth father, who died in the Holocaust, that he never knew his name, now the family knows his name, and a baby was given the name. So I just thought that was really beautiful. So his daughter sent me this picture, and I thought I'd share it.
Really nice.
This is what I call the mystery lockbox. What I'll say about it is my grandmother, now not the one written about in my book, but my other grandmother, who was also wonderful, but she kind of kept more secrets. And I say that probably most families, their relatives had mystery lock boxes. I used to watch her open it up and take out the documents, and she would never let me look inside. So that's what got me curious, and I started to look for what must be in there. So we can go on. This picture that I sort of put on top of a death certificate is my great-grandmother, Mary Brahinsky. I knew she died as a young woman. I had always figured she died during childbirth, which many of our female ancestors did, unfortunately. And I went into, originally the first time to find this, I went into the Philadelphia archives, and an archivist brought out her death record. She died in 1913. And I see she died of tuberculosis. So that was kind of surprising. Later on, what was interesting, there was an epidemic I started researching. If you remember the TV show Boardwalk Empire, Nucky Thompson would talk about his first wife, Mabel, and how she died in that particular tuberculosis epidemic. And I said, wow, they really did a lot of research. Of course, later on, it came out that there was yet another secret, and she didn't die from that. It was, she had a child that died and committed suicide, unfortunately. That's what was in the TV show. But I did think it was interesting that he originally tried to say that his wife died in this epidemic, and my family never told me that my ancestor died in this particular epidemic. So we could go on to the next one. So this is a mystery that was in my family. This is my grandmother, again, not the one from the book, my other grandmother with her father, Boris, who was a motorman in Philadelphia. This in 1929, I knew that he died very tragically, but I was always curious what happened and nobody would speak about it. So I went into the microfilms. Now a lot of things are on online. You can see a lot of newspapers online. And I found, here he is in two of the articles that I found. He was a motorman and he was late for work, and he ran to the corner and tried to jump onto the motor trolley. And his friend, who didn't see him, thought he was late and decided to take over driving for him. And he fell and got trapped and was run over. It's a horrible story. But this is why they must have kept it quiet, because it was so horrible and so tragic. But we can go on. Now, what's interesting, this is on Boris as well, the same gentleman who died. I knew he had a brother, but we never knew any of his family. There was a brother in America, and I once asked my grandmother, well, why don't we know any of them? She said there was a fight. Here we go to family fights over a gold watch, and apparently it was an heirloom that was both his father and grandfather's, and when he died, I think the brother wanted the gold watch. So this is from a metric book, which is from the Ukraine archives, and it talks about the bris and the birth of Boris. And what's interesting, this is from 1878. It gives his father Jacob and his grandfather Baruch. So they must be the two men who owned the gold watch before him. And of course, Sheila, look on the bottom, his mother, her maiden name, it's like
Gorbich,
Gorbich.
yeah.
Yes,
Mm,
which is similar. The G's and the H's often get
right.
interchanged in Ukraine. So we could go on. Okay, so here was another mystery. This is the little picture that I put on top there is my dad and his sister, and they had an older sibling that they didn't know, a baby that had died. So many families have these kinds of mysteries. They just didn't talk about it. And an elderly relative many, many years ago, I was a kid, let it slip to my father that there was a baby. And with that information, I went into the archives and found both a birth and a death record. There was a baby that died at 5 months. He was born premature and died from conditions related to prematurity. But I suspect that this was, a copy of this was probably in that mystery lockbox that my grandmother had. But that was another mystery in my family that I solved. And we can go on.
Yeah, I noticed you named from Brahinsky to Brahin. Who took over the Brahin from the Brahinsky?
Well, my grandmother on that, this
Yeah,
is the same one that had all the, yeah, she shortened it. And then I had uncles with all different names, variations of the names, just like you,
you
I
are
suspect.
right.
So this is a mystery photo. Now, everybody has these mystery photos and they kind of don't know what to do with them or who they are or how to solve them. This one had no photographer stamp and no writing on it. You should always check, because even if it's in a foreign language, you should get it translated, because sometimes the photography studios give you a town. So if it's from Europe, you'll know which side of your family it's from. This had nothing on it, and my grandmother had died, and my cousin gave me this photo. She's like, I'm not really sure who these people are. Do you want the photo? It was about 15 years ago, and I took it. And I started to look at it. There's a matriarch and a patriarch in the center there. And my grandmother had told me when they fled the pogroms, now we're getting to people left behind in Europe. We all have that. Most of us have that, who are watching now. She had an aunt and an uncle, and I didn't know, was this the aunt and her family or the uncle and his family? And then I looked, if you see the boy, the second from the left, there's a boy there. He's going to come up a little bit later just to take a look at him, but I didn't know his name at the time. And then over on the right, you see a young couple, a woman with a husband and baby and another child. And she did tell me, she had an older cousin, Hannah, who was Shulam, her uncle Shulam's oldest daughter, who had a baby that she knew about. So I'm thinking this is Shulam Cutler and his family that remained behind in Ukraine. So we can go on. How is this mystery solved? So here he is in a blown up version of, his picture. That's Shulam, the mystery patriarch. Underneath that, while I was putting together photos for my book that came out, the gentleman in the picture on the right was Avram Cutler. He appears in my book, as does Shulam. But I knew who he was because all of the 5 younger siblings came here. And his son was alive at one point. I was discussing with him. He says, there's this old photo of my father in a uniform, and he's with his brother. And the only brother that we didn't know what he looked like was Shulam, who left behind. So look, we can see that he matches the gentleman at top. Then you look over to the right, and guess what? About a month ago, a cousin of mine from Las Vegas texted me, we have a really good DNA match on Ancestry. And she says, I think it's someone from Shulam's family. So it was his granddaughter and great-granddaughter. And the great-granddaughter sent me this photo of Shulam as an older man, and we compare. So you can see all 3 men, except for the younger gentleman in the hat there. All 3 men are Shulam Cutler. So we have discovered who was in this picture. And then, of course, they recognized everybody in the photo. So we'll go to the next photo. Okay, so remember I discussed on this first photo on the left here, at the end, this is a blown up version of Hannah and her, not my Hannah, but her cousin Hannah and her baby and her husband. And sure enough, the DNA match was their daughter. And the granddaughter sent me the other photo. Look at them on the top right there. It's the same couple. So it's amazing that all these years passed and I had this photograph, and finally everything came together. So we can go on to the next one. Now I asked you all to look at the second young man or boy from the left on the picture. That was Lieb or Leo. I didn't know that was him in the picture until Shulam's family just told me. But there was a Yad Vashem testimony. This is what it looks like, by the way. It looks like it's in Russian. So each country and language has a different format. And I put the picture up there of him. But I knew about him because I found this testimony, and we tried to find his daughter who was listed at bottom. I actually sent a researcher in Ukraine and went to her, I tried everything, and she had just moved. So we didn't know what happened, but the new family that I just mentioned remembered Lieb and his daughter. So we can go on to the next one. So you really want to start with what and whom you already know, because you know more than you think. So if you want to record your history, if you're the oldest person, I ask you, write it down or record in some manner stories you've been told, even if you're not sure that they're completely true, because there's usually a kernel of truth. Younger people, reach out to the older generations. You'll want to reach out not only to parents and grandparents if you have them, but their siblings, sometimes cousins, even cousins of grandparents, share a same genealogy. Engage wings of cousins to help compile a family tree. I did some massive trees, and everybody got excited, and people who didn't really know me, but their grandparent knew my grandparent. It was enough that they knew, they believed me and knew who I was, and we all put together a massive tree. Also, check your attic, because people always kind of put up a box in their attic of stuff they don't really want to throw out, but they don't really know what to do with them. Photos. There's photos. Sometimes they have Yiddish on the back or other languages. Documents, old letters. A lot of people have immigration papers, vital certificates. I want to encourage everybody to record it in some way. So we'll go on to the next photo. Okay, so this isn't the most traditional way, but I noticed some of the younger kids that aren't into genealogy, well, they're into recipes, the brides. So someone in our family, a bride, the mother was collecting recipes, family recipes. So I snuck a little picture in there of a great grandmother of the groom. And I wrote a little bit about, like, in a paragraph or two. And on one side, I have she had a rice pudding recipe from Ukraine, and she was from Priluki in 1900. And what happened is in 1903, she was bending over to mix the rice pudding, and a pogrom bandit, flew in through the door and shot a bullet, and it went through as she's leaning over to mix the pudding. It went through the bun in her hair and landed, I think, in a wall, and she was pregnant. Thank God she was fine, but it made her rice pudding kind of famous and a kind of a famous story in the family. So I thought this was a clever way to sort of there's names of her parents, the city she's from, just get a little family history in there, because if the kids don't remember, they'll always go back to the recipe box and take a look. So we can go on. So manifest your gateway to the old country. There's a lot on those are passenger records. You want to really try to find that. You can find the year your ancestor came over. It's often on the census. On certain years they give the census. And Ellis Island, there's lots of, there's a website, ellisisland.org, I believe. Ancestry.com also has some passenger records. There are different ports that it's not just New York. I found some in some other cities, as you can see there. Jewish names, you may find your original Jewish name. No, they weren't changed on the ship. They were changed afterwards. So you're more likely to find something truest to the original name on the passenger record, although there could be a variation of spellings. And just one more mention, Steve Morse, he has a website that has a lot of search mechanisms for Jewish genealogy, and there's a gold passenger record search, and that's great for Jewish genealogy. And you can plug everything in, and it does like a search for you, and you come up with choices of who may be on a ship. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, so this is the passenger record that Sheila was talking about. We've used this in another in another presentation, but I love it because it shows that Sheila's relatives and my relatives are on the same page. So right. Do you want to chime in, Sheila?
This was the ship Byron, Byron, on one of its last voyages from Bucharest. What was the port? Costanza, the port of Bucharest, to Ellis Island in December 1923. And at the very, very bottom of this manifest is my mother, the last one, Chavid Zivnitska, which was David Zivnitsky, and my grandmother Sarah Zivnitsky. They were on the same ship as the people on the top are
Right.
the Cutlers, which are, well, you
So
explain that, Lisa, that's your family, right?
Yeah, that was it. Actually, my grandmother herself was on a ship that landed the same day. There was a whole commotion. There was quite a story about what happened to all of these ships on the same day. But this is her aunt and uncle, Yunkel and Esther, and their children. They're all in my book. But if you look all the way on the top line there, all the way to the right, the second, the big portion there, they ask who was the nearest relative left behind, and sure enough, it was Sholem Cutler. I don't know if you can see that. It's hard to see, but that was the gentleman who we identified in the mystery photograph. So when we look down at Sheila's family, it says nobody was left behind. So I think that's a good sign. Hopefully they all got here before the Holocaust, as this was in the fall of 1923.
Right. It was the last voyages because the American government pretty much shut down the immigration from Eastern Europe in 1924 with these anti-immigration laws, mostly against Eastern Europeans. So we know, Lisa, that Stavish, our shtetl from that our family is from, had about several hundred Jews still living there.
Yes, they
In
did.
1941, the Nazis came through and killed them all.
Yeah, they were all killed in the forest. There was a little girl that survived, and she appears in an appendix in my book. Um, and she told me, her daughter actually told me the story of what happened in Stavisht. It was in the forest, which happened all across Ukraine. But those hundred, most of them did pass away, and um, but luckily,
Wasn't, yeah,
yeah, luckily most of our family had survived. Not all of mine. Some of mine went to other nearby towns and passed.
yeah.
Okay. You want to go on
But
to the next one?
yeah,
Okay. So this is best practices. Basically, you want to start from the present and work backwards because you can't start from way back and work forward. So I went to a lot of cemeteries, or I called a lot of cemetery offices. Do you have my ancestor in your records? Because a lot of them are really nice. The gravestones often have dates, and often in Hebrew, the name of the father is on there. So you want to try to find if you know who your first immigrant ancestor was, because it's interesting if you could get like his or her passenger record. I obtained all these other types of records from, the cemetery, the death record, and then I went back in search of all these other records. So the census records give a lot of clues. So we could see what that looks like. The next one's the census. Oh, okay, it's interchanged here. These are just more different sources. I want to say that jewishgen.org, I think it's jewishgen.com. No, I don't have it in front of me. Jewish genealogy, just Google it. They're fantastic. Ancestry, Ellis Island. You see that on the Jewish Gen site, there's Jewish Gen Family Finder, where you can actually plug in the name and town and see who other people that are researching. There's a family tree of the Jewish people. There's different, I say, special interest groups for all different countries on there. I also recommend these free Facebook groups that I had mentioned earlier. There's lots of them if you're from Ukraine, if you're from Poland, all different groups that are involved. There's also public trees on Ancestry or Jenny. There's familysearch.org, which I think that's free. And I have to give a special shout out to the Italian Genealogy Society, who scanned all the New York City records up to a certain date, or indexes. And of course, many of the Jews that came into America, we find a lot of the Jewish records that way. So they were wonderful in doing that. It was a massive project. And take a DNA test. If you're, beware of surprises. If you don't think you can handle it, don't do it. But it's new and everybody's doing it, and it can be fun, and you might find, answers to a lot of things that way. We could go on to the next one. Okay, this was the census document. That's just a sample. I think this one's 1910. They go up to 1950. They haven't released 1960 yet, for privacy reasons. So these are the types of things highlighted in green that you can find on the census documents. A lot of them, it's interesting. You'll find surprise husbands on there, surprise children, occupation, education. This particular year, you can see the immigration year, and that led me many times looking for passenger records. Tells you how many years are married. Sometimes you can figure out, is it a first marriage or a second marriage, and where they live. So they hold many clues, and it's a lot of fun to document that way. Okay, you can go on. So basically, what is your family's mystery? Every family has one. Some are huge, some aren't so huge, but everybody has some type of a hidden fact. Are you going to reach out to relatives? Because that's what I do. That's where you find people who have previously done research, who have maybe stories. A lot of immigrants, like a lot of immigrant ancestors, I found came over and try to write compositions to learn English. And what did they write about? They wrote about what they went through. And really, that's a lot of it's all we have today. Will you compile a family tree, get the whole family interested in doing that? Will you take a DNA test, and will you accept surprise results? Because what we're finding is sometimes people, it does solve adoption. Sometimes people were born because of affairs, or a parent or even a grandparent. Sometimes they didn't know they had a half sibling. We find this every single day. So if you're going to take a DNA test, be prepared, because that can happen. And will you unlock your grandma's mystery box? So we'll go to the last one. So I happen to have found one that looked pretty close to the one with the key, the lock and key that my grandmother had. It was a metal box. And basically, I always wondered what happened to it. My grandmother, after she died, my father had predeceased her, so his sister was the one who had, gone through everything. And I called her up and I said, "Well, did you find the box?" And her response was, "What box?" So I think I was the only one who was really looking and knew and was aware of this box. And I suspect maybe my grandmother destroyed it and my aunt never found it. So, but those were some of the mysteries that were inside her box. And of course, I'm not sure, I would love to know what else was in that box. But Sheila, what do you think?
Well, there's so much here. Like, where do you begin? And I think we need to hear from people on the Zoom. I'd like to hear from them. Have you started your research? What do you want to know? Do you have any questions for Lisa? Let's open it up for talking about it. Who would like to go first? We have to unmute you.
Okay.
I'll talk. Hallie.
Okay.
Hallie,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, hi, Hallie.
Hi, Lisa. I've been working on genealogy for a number of years, and on my father's side, it's like this many pages wide in printouts. My great grandfather apparently had 3 wives.
Oh,
But the mystery, there's 2 mysteries. One is, Sheila, you probably don't remember, I showed you a photograph of my family
Yes,
in Old
yes.
Country.
Mhm.
And with the help of family, we've identified all the people in the picture. And I've been able to find their records. And surprisingly, I found that all the whole back row all perished in 1941. And I'm thinking, well, what happened in 1941? And then I realized exactly what happened in 1941. They were in Ukraine. They were in Zobeltov, or Kolomea.
actually, that wasn't far, I think. Zivotov, did you say? Or
Zobeltov.
Zivotov?
It was not far. Yeah, one relative was from one grandmother was Zobeltov, the other was Kolomea.
Okay.
So yeah, it was close on
Yeah.
that side. So the mystery was, why did all these people die at the same time? And finally the little light bulb went off and I realized they were all murdered.
It's pretty horrifying.
It
can
is.
The
look at-
Nazis, Nazis swept through all of Ukraine.
They
They
did.
did.
And,
I
and
mean-
all the shtetls were destroyed and
Yeah.
whoever was left were killed pretty much,
Yeah.
right?
And they were killed right there, I think, on the land. Not like the rest of Europe, we see them in concentration camps.
No, I think
Yours did, or what?
they were left behind because some of the people were here.
Oh, okay.
And these are the ones that stayed.
That stayed, right. But I'm saying that the ones murdered in Ukraine during the Holocaust probably were murdered in their own town.
I think so.
Yeah.
That's the impression I get.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd
But
like to find more information on them, but
You go on Yad Vashem,
I am going to do that.
And
I
you
made a
search,
note.
there's a search mechanism. They just changed it recently. It's a little harder to navigate, but if you work at it, you can do it. You type in the name. I would start the name and the country and
Mhm.
just keep looking through it. And you'll want to pay attention who submitted the testimony. That's usually on the bottom of the testimony because that
Okay.
shows somebody survived. And that way you may be able to be reunited with somebody. Also,
That would be
Yisker
great.
books, if you have if the town where they lived had a Yisker book written.
I have the Yisker books from
Oh, you
both
have it.
towns,
Okay.
from both sides of the from Kolomea and Zobeltov,
Okay.
but
Have
I
they been
can't find their names
translated?
in it. I have not been able to find their names in it.
No. Okay. Then maybe they were somewhere else. Maybe they were in a small shtetl right outside.
I don't know. I'd never heard that. These were just the names, but it's
Yeah. It's
it's
pretty
worth a look.
devastating.
Yeah, I'll check. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your question.
Lisa, I know you worked on Yiska books. Why don't you explain what the Yiska books are, in case some
Well,
people are not aware
it's
of
a
that?
Holocaust memorial book, usually devoted by town, but it can be by region or country. The ones by town are more informative because they
Mhm.
usually have like a list of people who lived in the town, people who died during the Holocaust, and there's usually unfortunately a small page of survivors for the Holocaust. What's really interesting too is that it's about the history of the town. So you don't have to have had family in Europe during the Holocaust to learn about the town. If your family came over in 1900, let's say, there's usually an earlier history in these books. Unfortunately, most of them are not in English, but over on jewishgen.org, you can find there's a Yisker book project. And it's not a complete translation. Some of the books are completely, Stavisht is completely translated. I head up one for Pachayev that my great-grandmother's brother helped write. But you will learn, there are some translations, you can learn about what life was like, Jewish life was like there.
They're in Yiddish. Most of them are in Yiddish.
Yeah,
Many of
most
them are.
Yiddish, Hebrew, some of the Slavic languages. It depends on
Yeah.
the book. Some have a little English in it too. One book that I head up had part of it in English. But yeah, my family's was in Yiddish. But as a child, I would look through it. I could read a little bit of the Hebrew letters, even though it was Yiddish, and I could read the surnames, so I knew the names, and I could see there were photos of my family in there, which was shocking.
Yeah. And it's not just statistics. There are wonderful stories, almost literary poems, all kinds of stories about what life was like in those
Yes,
towns.
Shabbos and
Right.
history.
Yeah. All right. Is there anything that you still need to find out about your families, Lisa? Are you
Well,
still have any mysteries
I'm
you're
going
Sheila,
to say
working on?
something to you,
before
Sheila.
the
There's,
next question, I
oh,
know
okay.
Karen
Oh,
Blaskin has
okay.
her hand
Okay.
raised.
No, never mind.
Oh,
Go
okay.
ahead. Go ahead.
Just wanted to say real quick, I gave Sheila a little homework assignment because her aunt was missing off of that passenger record. So I want her to get a death record so we know her aunt's maiden name, and then I'm going to find her on another ship.
Mhm.
But
Right.
we could go on to the next question.
Well,
Yeah,
mine's
who's
not a question, but
oh,
my cousin, when the Roots TV program came out, you remember when that
Oh,
was?
that was inspirational.
Yeah. She started doing some genealogy, and she was one of the first people years ago to start Jewish genealogy.
Who is your cousin?
Her name was Freya Maslov,
Okay, great.
but her specialty was helping people who knew the shtetl name
Mm-hmm.
that they came from, but they didn't know anything else. So she compiled lists on maps of the
Wow.
shtetls. And when she passed away, her daughter was trying to find somebody who would take the records. They finally did. So I don't know where they are now. I can ask her, she knows. But it took her a lot of time to
Yeah.
find somebody that wanted them because there were, file cabinets after file cabinets.
Well, now they can scan all that stuff too.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, on Jewish Gen, they have like, I don't know if they still call it a shtetl seeker.
Mhm.
Um, they have something for communities. I haven't been
Uh-huh.
on it lately, but you can place in your shtetl name, and it will tell you what gubernia or
Yeah.
uzed district, that's like county district, it was during certain years, what country it was, because with our ancestors where they came from, Ukraine, Poland, Russia, Lithuania, everything was kept changing. The borders, Romania,
Yeah.
Moldova. So they have something like that, a shtetl seeker for
Yeah, I
community.
There's
think she
also,
probably
Lisa,
distributed that.
Lisa, there's also a thing called Yiddish Land, I think put out by YIVO, the
Okay,
Institute for Jewish Research.
right.
They have all the shtetls there, and you
Oh,
can click on
wonderful.
and get to their Yiska books and other information.
Okay,
Yiddish, it's called Yiddish Land, I believe.
okay, now I'm going to check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have two more people with their hands
Okay.
raised. Karen?
Okay. Karen, which Karen? Karen Melkonian? Karen, are you there?
Hi,
Okay, there you are. Hi.
I'm having a little technical
All
problem,
right.
but that's
There
okay.
you go. We
Um,
hear you.
Oh, before
Um,
you start, Alana Lipkin is just saying to everyone, she gave the proper name for what the shtetl seeker is called now. Went off. Okay, go
Okay.
ahead.
So I had a little find about, Sheila knows this, about 10 years ago or 12 years ago, where I found a diary buried in my stuff that I had traipsed along with me after my parents died. They died when I was young. So, and it was my great uncle Maurice's diary that he started in 1946, and he wrote for 30 years until he died. And the first several years were in Frankfurt, Germany. And he was working with, he was an American GI located there. And he wrote about a lot of things in those few years. He volunteered in the displaced persons camps. There were multiple photos, like tons of photos of kids that were there, him. And then it was like a treasure trove of people. And he had some kind of OCD or something. He's a very good writer, but my God, they had 2 ounces of salmon. 3, I took a left, but the detail of what they could eat, what the conditions were like. They wrote back, they collected goods from like my grandmother and all kinds of people. But then he goes on for 30 years after that. And I did ancestry back then, and I pretty much got back to 1700
Oh my
on that
goodness.
particular side.
Mhm.
But
Were they rabbis on that side to have such a
my
lineage?
mother's, so I have to remember this. So actually, no, that was my grandfather's side. This side, actually, the one with the diary, his father was a cantor.
Mhm.
And he went to Norwich, Connecticut, and they took the boat, like, I can't remember what's called, the Lithuania, in 1900. The rest came over in 1903 from Kosnikova, which was in Lithuania then, because they were living in the Pale of Settlement. And great uncle Maurice, and there's all these letters, writes about how they had no food and how, but they hated the mother. All she did was give back to other people, didn't care about the kids. They had to steal potatoes when they were living there, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
He's funny. But I donated this diary to the Holocaust Museum in 2017.
Uh-huh.
I have it, I have the scan of it, and it's still not digitized. And I was so stressed out that I was delaying it because there were people in it, and I kept trying to Google the people because there's tons of people, names, he was a very good writer and very detail oriented. So when I got it, I reached out to, I'm obsessed with finding one family, and I cannot find them, but I actually found somebody, and her father, Asher Hirsch, and my great uncle, her father went back. He left on kinder transport. He went back as an American GI to find the rest of his family. And my great uncle Maurice writes about him again. He's very flowery, and so, but they go through all these places. Asher shows him like where they lived and what they did and all this other stuff. And I told his daughter,
They can index that, certainly.
and I told his daughter Miriam, I scanned everything. We're still in touch. You know, and it turns out on the day that he took my uncle, around November 11th, 1946, when Asher Hirsch was on his deathbed, he said, that was the worst day of my life. That's the day I found out what happened to my two youngest siblings and my parents.
So the
So
secret came out.
for that family, and then they have a whole thing going there. But there's one family that I looked for so many people, but one family, if anyone, you know, if you look them up, you find my name and then Uncle Maurice Levitt's in the Holocaust Museum, that he had a picture of, and then wrote a description. I identified the picture from his description, and I can't find them anywhere. Most of them were trying to go to Palestine, or they were all trying to go somewhere, and he was getting addresses, trying to hook them up to different places, and all kind, giving them and going out with the kids and all that stuff. But I'm obsessed with finding Frida and Merrick Rubenstein, who were 3 and 7 in 1946.
Oh,
And
my.
I can find them nowhere. Now, they could be deceased, but I don't know where they went. So for some reason,
Did you check like variations of the spelling of their name first, and like maybe they Americanized their names, the first names, maybe there was a variation in the spellings?
you know, over the years, I keep going back to them, and I've like found other people along the way, and I send them stuff that I find. But the Holocaust Museum has the photos, and they have this description, which I gave them, of this one photo, which is the most moving thing going. And it just makes, she tries to be so proud, but her kid got hit by shrapnel and whatever. And then he also goes through tuberculosis, he goes through hospitals, and just, he wrote an article called Stein and Toller's, and about what he was very detailed about the kids in the tubercular area who were dying, and just heartbreaking stuff. So I got my history on that side. My Armenian side, I can find nothing, and they weren't the Jews. So just saying the Jews were much better. I can't find any other.
Well, there
Better
was
better
an
sources.
Armenian Holocaust as well, or
Yes.
genocide. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't
My
know if
father
that-
fled. They fled
Yeah.
from that.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, so the Jews are better. I find nothing on that side.
Mhm.
So that's my story.
Thank you.
Anyone else? That's fascinating. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Stacy has her hand
Jules has
raised.
had her hand up forever.
Can we unmute? There you go.
Hi,
Hi,
Stacy.
Stacy.
Hello. So two questions. You talked about what, in the early 1900s, that Russia, Poland, Ukraine, when you're trying to find family that came from there, do you use what the country is now? What the country was then?
Well, I research what it is now, because
so
when you
what
do
it is
this, when
now.
you do the search on jewishgen.org, you can plug it in there. Yeah, I use the country that it is currently, and then, but yeah, that's how I would do it. You may find different countries named like on their documents if you have their documents. Like I know Latvia and Lithuania, they'll always say during a certain time period it's Russia because of Russian Empire. Belarus and Poland, I've had documents that say both with the same town. They were like a mile apart, from the border. I do it what it is today. That's what I would recommend.
Okay, all right. And my second question, and it's a common name, Esther Cutler.
Well, Esther Cutler, there was one in my book. My guess she was an married aunt, an aunt who married into the family.
Okay, because I have an Esther Cutler who's who was married to my great uncle Oscar.
Okay, it wasn't
from
an Oscar.
Massachusetts.
Well, she may have remarried. Was he a Cutler? Or
No,
was her
he
name
was.
Cutler?
So her name was Cutler.
Was
She
it later
Esther
in life?
Cutler.
Was it a later in life marriage? Because she was married to Yunkel, but then she did remarry after he died. So
No,
was
her
it
first husband, my uncle, died young.
okay?
He was actually he was on a spy mission during World War II.
Wow.
And his plane was shot down over the Pacific, and his remains were never found, but there is a memorial for him in Honolulu along with the other service members that died.
Mhm.
But we had his wife was Esther Cutler from Pittsfield, Massachusetts.
Okay, there is a segment of my family named Cutler that were here before my grandmother got here, and they actually signed the paperwork to help them immigrate. So I wonder if there was just another Esther, because they were in Massachusetts. They were
Yeah.
in Chelsea and in that particular area. A lot of Cutlers.
Yeah,
So
I
I
think
just thought-
Cutler's a fairly common last
It
name.
is.
Yeah.
Well,
Not all
Cutler's,
Cutlers are.
Horowitz,
Yeah.
Deutsch.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In
right.
in Ukraine, it was Kotlyar. So I was able to, I just want to mention anybody who's studying, researching in Ukraine, Alex Krakovsky, who's a genealogist, has scanned a lot of records from the archives. And it's just fascinating. There is a website, it's in Russian. You really have, if you can't speak Russian, you need help with it. But that's what I found my family name. The Cutler was Kotlyar. That's interesting. But you never know, we might share some DNA.
Maybe.
Right. Check it
Thank
out.
you.
Thank you for your question.
People were questioning the PowerPoint. First of all, this thing is being recorded. So it
Oh,
will
okay.
be on the Federation website eventually. It will go there. You can find it there. If you want somebody asked for the PowerPoint, if you email me, I'll send you the PowerPoint. I have that on my computer. And what is your email address, Lisa, if people
Okay.
want to write
It's
to you?
my name, so you can see it on that board behind me. Lisa Brahin, Lisa, B as in boy, Rahin as in Nancy, @gmail.com. And you can feel free to, thank you, Rachel. You can feel free to email me. Just put in the subject heading that you watched the presentation so I know who the email's from, and I'd be happy to give you my best guess. I'm, not an expert in everything, but I can at least guide you where you might look. And again, those Facebook groups, 75, 80,000 members. So you have people that have, research like Sephardic genealogy in all different countries and all different things that I've never really explored. And if you need help with that, I would recommend you join and do a post and see, they also, some people will help translate if it's a small amount, something on a letter or something like that.
Do we have anyone else who has a comment or a question?
I'll add a comment,
Okay.
just to say that I've been doing this for about almost 50 years, I guess. And a lot of times you do a lot of research and it comes up with nothing. And then other times out of nowhere, you get a connection with all kinds of lost relatives that you had no idea existed. And for example, one of my aunts, who was sort of the family historian, she died in 1983. And we had been asking her, do you know anything about the relatives that were left in the Ukraine? And she said, oh, they all died in the war. Well, after she died in 1983, we found letters, correspondence from 1940s, just early in the war. And I wrote to those addresses. And at first I got no response, but then I kept writing because I'm persistent. And I found out that 7 of my father's first cousins still existed in Kiev. And I went to visit them in 1987 and in 1989. And we actually even brought one of the families over here to New London. Where in fact, she's going to be at our Rosh Hashanah dinner in a couple of days.
Oh,
so keep at it. You're going to get all kinds of, you say the mysteries. Some of them are negative, but you get some really amazing, wonderful things. I know, for example, my mother's father did not have, I saw him toward the end of his life. He died in 1955. He had a very sad life. He had been an actor at one time in Yiddish theater, but he ended up being a peddler and barely made anything. But in newspapers.com, I came across in the early 1940s, there's an article about him saying that he was entertaining people at the Jewish Community Center in Chicago. Every Saturday night, people would come out and he would be talking about the stories about how they filled up the Yiddish theater with 1,000 people, how he performed with Morris Tomaszewski and Monty Kahn and a whole bunch of others. And to me, that was, what a reward that was. I love
That
it.
sounds great. Now, is your family, you still have family members living in Ukraine? Are they safe?
Well, actually, interestingly, most of the family came to, well, half of them went to Israel, half of them went to the United States. They're mostly in Philadelphia. Uh, one family is here. And there's still one family still left there in Kiev. We used to call it Kiev because in those days they
Yeah,
actually spoke
it was
Russian,
Kiev. Yeah.
and
Yeah,
now
yeah.
Yeah.
they're speaking more Ukrainian.
Yeah, well, you're
Right.
just a quick mention because you brought it up. Newspapers.com is like historical newspaper. It is a paid site, but wow, I've really found some stuff there. And also, the New York Times has an archive, and I think it's also probably a paid site. You might be able to see the index. But that friend of mine whose father was in Sing Sing, we found a lot of dirt on him in the New York Times. So they do come up, and like even the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, boy, they were very explicit when it's hard to say this, when people died, they were very explicit in certain years, the 1930s, the 1940s. It's like big news in the paper, things we wouldn't really put in the paper today. But I have come across some interesting things. So thank
And
you for bringing that up.
when you do find things, very often people just keep them in a box or somewhere.
Yeah.
If you watch Finding Your Roots,
Love
on
it.
PBS, I made one of those scrapbooks for my wife's side of the family. I did the research for them, and I did for my own family. And whenever the relatives come over, that I show them, things that are in there, many of which they didn't know. And it's very easy to put together one of those scrapbooks.
It's very wonderful. So I have a question for Aaron, for Lisa. We, on this program, most of us are of a certain age.
Mhm.
Are our children and grandchildren as interested as we are in keeping those boxes, keeping those family trees, and fostering that in their lives? What do you think?
Well, can I begin with that one?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have to say, so far with my kids, not a lot. I hope someday that they'll be interested, and if not, there'll be somebody. But again, my inspiration came from a non-direct ancestor. So, I mean, I just think it's so important to record it in some way, because I went looking when I wrote Tears Over Russia. I went looking for stories. I went looking for stories that people in my grandmother's generation from that town wrote down when they got here. And they probably never thought I'd ever see it. I mean, but it meant the world to me. And it enabled me to put together an entire story of a town and people. And I just think it's so important to do that. So I'll let Aaron.
I would say yes and no. They've heard me tell them things, and I've shown them the scrapbook. I'm talking about my three sons. One in particular, I think has a more interest and will carry on some level. The other two are just enjoy the stories, but they're not doing any research of their own. But I'm glad it exists now.
Yeah, absolutely. Jan
So,
just chimed in on a message,
yeah,
and she
I
said,
see.
yeah.
Yeah.
But Jan, listen, the man in my family who was not my direct ancestor, his kids never, I mean, I eventually found them. They didn't even know he wrote a Yisker book. It was
So,
me there's going to be somebody, Jan, even if it's not a direct descendant, or it could be a cousin's child, because remember, your roots go back all to the same place if you're related. Like if it's it could be a grandchild of your grandparent's sibling. There's always, I would scan it. If you have information, scan it and somehow, find a way to preserve it.
yeah, in case everybody didn't take a look at the chat, Jan said, sadly, we don't have anyone in my family who wants to carry on the history. I worry about the fact that I am hitting 80 and no one wants to keep up our My Heritage site. So I think my question was pretty relevant because
Yes,
I sense that from our younger
yes.
generations, they live in the now moment and in the future moment. They're not thinking about the past as we are, perhaps.
Right, but
Am I wrong?
Sheila, there may be a generation after that. Look how many generations from a great grandparent's sibling, all the way down to me. what is that, like 3 generations? There's going to be somebody looking for that information. If you don't record it, even if it's not for your children or grandchildren, if you don't record it, it's not going to be recorded. It's left to you to record.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you that I was that person from my ancestors. I was the one who asked the questions. My grandparents had, I want to say, widows of their first cousins, and I was a little girl. I write to them, "What do you know?" And they had the box in the attic. You know, they wanted to clean it out, and they'd ship it to me. And I have like passports from Russia. I have photographs. You would be amazed. Naturalization papers, because I don't know, I guess nobody in their family was interested, or maybe it was the husband's family and no one was interested, but I was the one looking for it, and there's going to be another me somewhere. And
Okay.
maybe that child will put together a story because of the work that you began.
Right. Okay. Jan says, thank you, Lisa. That was inspiring. Uh,
Thank you, Jan.
Someone else wants to say something before Lisa gives us our final inspiration to do this work? Anybody? No? If not, Lisa, yeah,
I think
somebody
I
coming
covered
on?
it. I mean, I just want everybody to
Oh.
really record what they know and ask questions. Call people up. You know what? You reunite families that have been long, you know, as the generations go on, they seem to fall apart, the families. They're not as close. They just stick in their own wing. But on several times when I put together trees, I reached out, and now we're all friendly. Some people have cousins clubs, but it's really a wonderful thing. And I made a booklet. I did it. I years ago printed out a booklet, and everybody gave me photographs. But I'm talking about the sepia photographs from Europe, and we put them in the book. And to me, it's just so important to know our legacy, like what our ancestors went through. They had struggles. They left. They usually didn't leave for good reasons when they left Europe. Sometimes they did. I had one that followed a man for love, and thank God, because she survived the Holocaust. But most of the time, especially with our Jewish people, we find that there were struggles in Europe. And I just think it's so important to learn what they went through and to appreciate, especially the early years. I cover a lot of the early years in my book, what my grandmother went through. She really worked hard. She had to leave school at 14 and just to support her family because they struggled. But now, because of her, my family, my children, we're all educated. We have more chances. We have a better life. And I think by knowing our history, by chasing our history, we understand and we come to appreciate it more.
I think that's a great ending, Lisa. Thank you so much for all the work that you have done. And I think that what you just said, I don't think we appreciate the courage that our grandparents, our great grandparents had to escape the way so many of them did. Do we think of them as heroes, as courageous people? I think we need to. And you're bringing them to life for us. And I hope we can translate it down to our children with the kind of inspiration that you bring. So Cheryl says thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. We gave you Lisa's email.
Yes, and feel
this is
free to
recorded.
email me if you have a question, because a lot of people think
Okay.
of things afterwards.
Okay, great. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you for
And bye,
inviting me.
everyone.
And thank you for
Bye.
Thank
attending,
you and good
everyone.
night.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you. Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.